So there's really two main types of montage. There's a music montage that is cut to a specific musical track where you're using cues and striking points on that song and blending it together to the visuals to create a very, very strong combination of this audio and visual experience that is film.
I want the time. All my people right there in the back of the spot. I need the time. If you know me, you don't know me to stop. I need the time.
Now, on the other hand, there is a more hip hop style montage where we use the actual audio from that specific take or specific shot as the backing track to these shots that we're showing. Now, that has a totally different feel, which we're going to get into. And really, what's going on here with montage is that we are choosing to show the audience all these different kind of shots, right? All these different kind of all this different kind of information for them to download. And really, what's happening is when we're seeing a film, there's a specific image and there's an emotion associated with that image, and then we download it. And then the subjects are saying something. There's a story that's being told, and we're constantly downloading that story visually and audibly. Now, what I love about montage and why it's so kind of an exciting, inspirational tool or very emotional tool that creates a very strong response in the viewer is this montage is a hyper download of so much information squeezed into maybe a 30-second or 20-second sequence, right? Where in everyday waking life, we don't have all these cuts going on. You begin your day in the morning and you go through your day, and then it's at the end of the day, right? It's one stream of consciousness. Now, with montage, we're able to skip around and really be breaking this day-to-day continuity. We're breaking it with purpose. And that really, to me, is what montage is really centered around, is a purposeful break in continuity to create a very, very specific emotional reaction in the viewer. All right, so let's first take a look at music montage, right? Where we're basically using the cues to an audio soundtrack to really cut and get into different kind of rhythms and really make certain kind of shots stand out as impactful and really have a marriage between the vibe and the emotion of the visuals that we have and the vibe and the emotion of the song that we're using. So for this video, it's actually a very close and important project to me that we recently put together. I produced it. We had, I think, 6 different characters, or really soldiers from different eras: samurai, Native American, redcoat, a modern day businesswoman, kind of CEO type, and a US Marine, a few more. But you get the point, you get the gist of it, that we basically took all of these warriors from different eras, thousands of years apart, and compress that in time and put them in the same exact room in a 3-minute video. So that alone has a certain kind of emotion, right? A certain kind of vibe to it. So the soundtrack that we chose has that same kind of, I don't know, heartful, kind of slow and emotional vibe as well. So now what we need to do in the music montage sequence is to really pair the audio and visual together, using the cues, using the striking points, using the different moments in the song. So let's just take a quick look at what this currently looks like, and then I'll break down what I did and why I did it. So, as you can see, there's a very, very emotional build in the actual visuals that we shot. The younger couple changes history by replacing their weapons with everyday items that doesn't create violence. So, you really can use montage to take all these different elements, squish it together in a specific and thoughtful way that creates that emotion where I'm sure you felt what the warriors were feeling. I'm sure you felt the realness of who they are. So if we had, for example, this visual, same exact visual track, but without the audio, it has a totally different feeling. We can tell what's going on. We can tell that it's still the same basic, events that are unfolding, but there's no connection that we have because that audio, that song, that soundtrack is just in the background telling us what to actually feel. So when we see these visuals with no actual mood or motivation of to feel happy, to feel sad, there's no effect that it has on the viewer. So the audio that's playing in the background is incredibly crucial for film, but it's everything in the montage where the sounds make the visuals and the visuals make the sounds. So let's get back to using the audio track and see what kind of cues they were actually cutting on to create this impactful edit. And so as you can see with the waveforms of the soundtrack, there are various valleys, peaks, and plateaus. So really what you're actually doing is taking this waveform of an actual song and turning that into an image. This is what film is. This is really what a montage is. Seeing this waveform, analyzing it, and listening to it as the editor, taking these various peaks and valleys and different rhythms and beat of the song and creating that visual storytelling. So let's go to the very beginning of this track. It has actually a really cool kind of clock ticking in the background that had a really cool introductory feel that was perfect for this montage. Now I choose to cut on every fourth beat for this intro. So as you can see, this is the same length as this, which is the same length of this. And then this fourth clip is actually longer, which bridges into this different kind of transition where you can tell that the pacing changes, where it's beat, 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 beat. But once we have this pause here and then we bridge this gap, you can see that the actual pacing or the beat is going to be different at that portion. So seeing that as the editor, we should know that these 4 visuals should have something definitely in common. And then once we bridge this gap to this new different kind of pacing, there should be a shift in the overall feeling or emotion of what we're seeing visually. So let's see what that looks like. So as you can see, this first set of sounds had a specific emotion to it that tied along to the audio that we were hearing. And then as soon as we went through this little pause into this much more kind of airy feeling, we then cut to this cool, misty fog intensified scene at the very beginning of our shoot. So that's a perfect example of also changing the rhythm as well. Here we can see through looking at the waveform that the beat is really the driving force behind this part of the song. So I chose to show 4 shots in this 5 to 8 second window. Now when we get to this part, there's a totally different feeling. I chose to show half the amount of shots because it was a much more slower pacing for that specific part in the soundtrack. So we go into the break and slow things down. And now we go into a different set of shots where we kind of pick the pace back up. So you can see when we went into this slower pacing where we chose to only use 2 shots, there was a slower feeling with the soundtrack. And then after that break, things started to pick back up into the song, and that's where we actually increased the pacing following the overall ebb and flow of the soundtrack. Another thing that I really love about using songs is getting into all the little intricacies of what I'm hearing. I was always definitely drawn to just marrying the audio and visual, right? So there's a little bit of a really cool kind of like, I don't even know really how to explain the sound that's at this certain part of the song, but let's see if you guys can see the visuals that I matched up to that actual sound. So it was kind of like a reverse, but it kind of sounded like you were moving into something. So that's a perfect example of something that you're hearing. You're taking that, you're analyzing that waveform, and you're creating something that's telling a visual story to that sound. Now, after that cool reverse sound effect where we go from the behind the scenes shot into the actual red camera footage, there's also a difference in the overall styling of the song itself. We can see that there's a change from this really cool airy vibe, there's that reverse, and then it goes into the actual beat of the song comes in. So at that point, that's when I decided as the editor to go from cutting from that more airy sound to cutting to the actual beat of the soundtrack so that the viewer really gets to ride along with the actual beat or the instrumentals that come into that song at that moment. Let's see what that looks like. So you can see that we're cutting to each kick or each snare because at that point in the song, that's the most dominant audible thing that the viewer is going to be able to hear. So it wouldn't make sense to cut to, let's say, a vocal sample or something that's more in the background in the song because there wouldn't be as much of a cohesive feeling there. So always keeping that in mind that if you're going to cut to a musical soundtrack, then cut to that musical soundtrack. Don't get lazy and cut between where the beat is. And it's not that you necessarily always have to cut just to that kick and to that snare. No, it's that if in that moment it makes rhythmic sense and it makes sense that those two visuals and that audio element line up, okay, make the decision to cut to those instruments. When the vibe changes and we get into a slow sequence, make the decision to cut to a specific sound that the viewer is hearing. So we have that cohesive feeling and everything is working together. The audio is complementing the visuals and the visuals are complementing the audio. And so with all that in mind, every song obviously has a beginning, middle, and an end. So we went through the beginning, we saw the middle sequence, and then there's the end to the soundtrack. Now, it's the same kind of understanding that if we're going to have the visuals complement the audio, that we want to have the end of the visuals feel like the end of the song. So that's probably going to entail slowing down the pacing, right? Or maybe using shots with the camera movement of the pull out, right? The stuff that we talked about before. When we're doing a push in, we're going into a scene, we're learning more information and getting closer to something. When there's a pull out, we're leaving the scene, we're ending the scene, we're basically turning the page and we're feeling like things are coming to a close. We're moving away from things and they're not as important, they're in the distance. So knowing that, when you have those kind of shots in post-production, those are the things that you want to have lined up ahead of time of how am I going to end this video? How am I going to end this montage with the song that I'm using? So let's take a look here at what kind of shots I decided to use to really tie in with the soundtrack and give a fully cohesive feeling. all of those shots have a specific vibe, right? They have a specific feeling behind them that directly lines up with the feeling of the song ending. So in this specific circumstance, I used the shots that tied the story around, right? It gave a full circle. It brought the video around to be completed, where the warriors started as enemies. You could see that they were fighting, going against each other, facing off. And there was a shift that happened because of certain characters in the film, and they were able to basically come together. So, knowing that, I know that I'm going to have those shots at the end of the montage to fully tie in to the end of the song, the end of the video, and that creates that full, complete edit that we're looking for. So, with that said, it's obviously extremely important that we're seeing to have that cohesive feeling where the beat is changing, the shots are changing, the rhythm is changing, the shots are changing, the tone or the dynamic of the song is changing, the shots will change and correlate to that. And when you decide to be cutting on a specific sound that's happening in the soundtrack, you really got to stick to that sound and you really got to be in tune with the feeling that you're wanting to create and the feeling that the viewer might be experiencing in that moment listening to that song. Is it happy? Is it slow? Is it fast? Is it energetic? You tune into that and you really vibe off what the feeling is that you're getting. Man, that was a ton of deep, deep understanding of the dynamics and the actual knowledge behind what a music montage actually is, right? Really interesting stuff. And it's only taken me about 7 or 8 years of working in film and creating so many videos to understand what we're doing, how we're affecting the viewer, and how to do these things consciously. Really, what happens is you kind of stumble upon these different dynamics and different principles and different kind of keys and understanding of things on accident, really, by getting your hands dirty and creating projects and doing different things and being really exposed to different videos and different songs and different techniques and ways of doing things. So is a lot of information. Is really what the whole idea is that this will be a tool or a platform for you guys to take any project that you have and really plug in this information and this knowledge into that project and create a much more successful, incredible video. So with that said, let's get into the next type of montage, which is called a hip hop montage, right? This is where we're not using the backing track of a musical song, but what we're deciding to do is use the actual audio from a specific event or that specific moment of that scene as the backing track. So we don't have the song telling the viewer what to feel, how to feel. What we do have is the actual audible sound that was happening that's really acting as that background layer, right? It's a totally different vibe because the musical soundtrack, we kind of go along with it and it has peaks and valleys, but having the actual live audio from the actual scene really kind of makes you feel like you're actually there, right? It's a much more realistic version of a montage where with the music, you kind of turn off the thinking brain and then go along for the ride. Now, with the hip hop montage, it creates a much more different dynamic where the viewer is experiencing the visuals and the audio from that scenario. So, music montage, we're seeing the visuals and they're paired up amazingly to a musical track, right? And that's creating a very strong emotional charge if we do it right. Now, with the hip hop montage, we're saying, hey, I want you to experience the visuals and the audio of this specific moment as if you were there. So, totally different dynamic, but really an interesting effect that it has. So, let's take a look and see what that looks like.
Let's reset.
it creates a really cool vibe, like very, for this specific project, is a really cool behind the scenes feeling as if you were a part of that production. So what I decided to do for this video was contrast the musical montage that is the main event of the video with an introduction that is a hip hop montage, because like I said, it makes you feel like you're there, and it pairs up perfectly with the behind the scenes, because the behind the scenes, you're not seeing that amazing cool cinematic shot, but what you're really getting a feel for is that more raw behind the scenes feeling. So knowing that, I really thought it was a perfect example, or a perfect moment to use that hip hop montage to create that feeling and that experience for the viewer as if they were a part of the production, seeing the behind the scenes, seeing the beginning of the day, seeing the work that went into the project, and then going into the music montage. Now, what you can do that's also really interesting is, yes, the music montage is kind of more of that raw, gritty vibe. That's why it's been used in some movies as more of that kind of just like street, urban-y feel. But what you can do is combine these two types of montage where you do have a musical backing track, and then you have the actual hip hop montage element where you have the actual audio from that event. So let's see what that looks like.
Let's reset.
So perfect. You can see that there's really cool dynamic is to have these really quick cuts with this dreamy kind of soundtrack, and then actually experiencing the audio from that situation created a really cool dynamic of this very quick kind of flashback feeling. Now, the last step that I did was to add a little bit of sound effects on the intro and the outro of this specific sequence. Let's see if you can see the difference.
Let's reset.
With those sound effects on the intro, I think I used like a 747 flyover with a few sweeps and a few down sweeps and up sweeps, and it really kind of creates an intro for the viewer and then creates an outro, so that we don't just come in from black to the picture. There's audio that allows for that transition to happen, and then at the end there, we don't just cut from the picture to black. There's that up sweep that kind of creates that moment where the viewer knows it's coming, and then we go into the musical track. So it's a cool dynamic to play with. Now, you're not always going to be able to combine a hip hop montage and a music montage in the same video. This is a very unique circumstance, but I thought it was a perfect example for you guys, so you can really see the contrast between what the effects are of editing to a backing track, having everything synced up, editing to the beat, editing to specific instruments in that song to create an emotion in the viewer, or editing to the actual audio from the shots that you were using, and you can either have it just that audio, or layer sound effects with that, or layer a musical track so that you really have a dynamic montage. And now, before we move on, I think I had a really good other example in a past video of what a hip hop montage looks like. It's pretty effective. So there's montage. Next up on this very in-depth list that I'm sharing with you guys so that you can become incredible video creators is using title cards. Now, title cards are really ideal for using in any situation where you want some type of information to be conveyed to the audience that's not already being told by the visuals in a scene or the audio in the scene. So really, a perfect example would be an establishing or location shot. You can use a title card in that scene to display to the audience the information of where that location is, right? What city that's in, what state that's in, or even the time of day, or even the time of year, if that's appropriate for the information that you want the audience to know, if it has a certain significance. So really, overall, this can be used for the location, the time of day, the name of the subject that's on the screen, or any kind of information that you want to be displaying to the audience at that moment. Now, with title cards, there are a little bit of do's and don'ts here as well. Basically, you always want to be having your text legible and visible to the audience. Otherwise, it's just misinformation, right? They're not going to be able to absorb that data that you're giving to them on the screen by telling them specific information. So that's easily kind of done by knowing what the background is looking like and what the font is looking like. Always choosing a correct font to be displaying that's not crazy calligraphy or just any odd strange symbols that someone won't really be able to absorb. So that's an obvious one. Secondly, is generally with text you want to be putting some kind of drop shadow behind the font if there's not enough contrast. We talked a lot about contrast earlier. If there's not enough contrast between the font and between the background, right? So if we have a white font, a white text with a white or very lightly colored backdrop, we're going to want to put in a drop shadow behind that lighter text to really separate the background so that the audience can really see what that font is actually displaying. And so lastly, with these title cards, it's all about framing. Just like with cinematography, we're not going to frame the subject in a very odd part of the frame unless consciously we know we want to create a specific and special reaction in the viewer. So font or text really works the best on the lower third of the frame, either to the left of the frame or the right of the frame on the lower third. And so if you have a kind of cool shot that has a ton of texture with one negative pocket with some negative empty space, you can kind of bend this rule exactly like cinematography, where we don't always have to be placing the font in these kind of boring, always used areas. If it works for the shot, we can consciously break the rule, put the font where we like, as long as it makes sense and is it a cohesive look for the shot that we are using.